Hi, and welcome to Christopher's Cucina. In this episode, we'll be talking about everything risotto, with emphasis on seasoning and technique. The world of risotto can be open to many things. Risotto is a rice-based dish. It's a creamy rice dish. In this case, we're going to feature mushroom and truffle. So we're going to go on the mushroom risotto route here. But anything can be, this could be any vegetable. It could be anything. This could be completely vegetarian. It could be vegan by using water instead of chicken stock. We'll get into that as we go. So to get started on the risotto, we have a pan over medium heat. We want a particular pan for this. We want a pan that's a little bit wider and has high sides, okay, rather than a short pan because we want some surface area for this rice to cook and to absorb the liquid. The idea of this dish is, contrary to say a regular rice that you would get where you do a 2-to-1 ratio of water to rice and it just bakes or cooks and then you can fluff it at the end. This is where we're going to add liquid gradually as we're stirring. What that does is as we stir the risotto, it'll release the starch out of this grain. This is considered a short grain rice. A regular rice that you would get in a store would be considered a long grain rice. Doesn't have nearly the starch content that this does. We want the short grain rice in this case because we want the starch to add to our finished product. We're going to take a little bit of olive oil in a warm pan. I also like a little bit of butter in this. We finish with the butter as well, but I like to start with the butter as well. As the oil and the butter start to warm up, we're going to add a little bit of diced shallots and some sliced garlic, as well as there's some chopped thyme going into this, and a whole branch of oregano. Why the whole branch? Well, this is going to be removed at the end. We don't necessarily want the oregano in there. It's not going to hurt that it's in there, but we don't want to destem part of the oregano in there. We want to impart the flavor of the oregano and be able to remove it, and we'll garnish with a sprig of oregano at the end. Anything that we garnish food with in the culinary world, we want the garnish to be edible, meaning that somebody could pick a piece of this oregano off and put it in the dish and it would complement a dish. We don't just want a branch of something on there that somebody would remove. Most of the time somebody would remove that but it will look nice on the dish at the end. As this butter and oil heat up, I want to put the oregano right in, and it's going to sizzle and pop, as well as the thyme. You hear that pop? Right into that warm oil and butter. What that's doing right away is it's infusing that oil with the flavor of the thyme and the oregano. A little bit of shallot go in, as well as some sliced garlic. Wooden spoon, very important in this case. Doesn't have to be, but the reason why I consider it important is because it allows you to get into the sides of the pans, metal on metal spoon into the pan. Sometimes just sounds like it's a little rough. The wooden spoon in this case has more of a comfort feel to it, and this is a comfort dish. This is a comforting dish. We don't want to brown this and get any color on this. We want to simply it's called sweating it. We want to sweat the onions and the shallots out. That means cooking them with little to no color so they infuse the flavor, impart the flavor, but we don't want to necessarily brown it, because when we brown something, that imparts a brown flavor that isn't what we want in this dish. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not what we're going for in this dish. As the shallots and garlic continue to sweat, this will take about 2 to 3 minutes over medium heat. The oregano is wilting in there and imparting the flavor, and the thyme is released into that oil. We're going to come back and add a little bit more thyme to this at the end if we need. Now we can add our rice directly to the pan. This is where it differs from a regular rice that you cook, because you introduce liquid and regular rice together. In this case, we want to toast the arborio rice in here. Carnaroli is another type of rice that you could use. It's a short grain rice. Arborio is a type of rice. Carnaroli is a brand. Both arborio rices though. That's the trick. Any type of arborio rice that you use will work in this case, so long as it's arborio. That's the most important part of this. So now we want to toast the rice over medium heat till it gets a little bit nutty, a little bit brown. It should take about 3 to 4 minutes to achieve that. As that's happening, we're going to put the mushrooms in shortly. I didn't want to cook the mushrooms first. I want the mushrooms to cook inside of this rice as this cooks rather than saute those with the vegetables. What that does is it allows the mushrooms to fully impart their flavor without releasing brown liquid into the bottom of this dish. When we cook mushrooms over heat with oil and onions and garlic and such, mushrooms, as most vegetables, are 90% water. If you don't brown the mushrooms right away, they're going to essentially steam and release water. We want that, except we don't want the brown water. We just want the natural water from the mushrooms. That's flavor. So we want that to release inside the risotto as it's cooked, not ahead of time. Risotto is one of my favorite dishes. It can be interpreted in many different ways. It can be vegetable risotto. It can be a Parmesan and lemon risotto, just to name a few. Anything can be turned into risotto. We have some hot stock on the side too. We're going to ladle in hot stock as we go. So now at this point, now that the rice is toasted into this pan, this is why we need the wide surface area. If we were in a taller pan, we wouldn't get the surface area on the rice, and it would just take longer to achieve our results. We're going to add a little bit of white wine to this. It's going to evaporate right away, and that acidic flavor is what we're looking for here. Now we can start to, little by little, we can lower our heat at this point, and as we put this stock in incrementally, we want to stir. This is the trick of the risotto. Adding stock gradually. When the stock absorbs, we stir it in. As the stock absorbs, we add more. At this point in cooking, once you start with the cooking of the rice in the pan, you're looking at about 18 minutes start to finish on the risotto. At this point, I'm going to add the mushrooms in. These mushrooms, by not adding them in the beginning as well, will allow us to not have the mushrooms become extra soft. We want a little bit of texture out of these mushrooms and this finished product. The other thing we haven't done yet that's very important is we want to introduce some salt and some pepper. We want to do that now. We want to season in layers in this. So we're going to add a little bit of kosher salt and some fresh ground black pepper. We'll continue to monitor the seasoning as this cooks down, and we'll adjust as we go, and we'll certainly finish at the end when we taste. Now that the mushrooms are in, the stock has absorbed the first round, we're going to come back with another ladle of stock. In the event you wanted to keep this completely vegetarian, you could simply use water. If you use water, I would take some, in an effort to season the water, maybe add some of the herbs to the water, some bay leaf, some garlic to kind of season the water so it's not just plain water. That'll only yield a better finished product. So we know 18 minutes is going to be our cook time on this. It's just a matter of how gradually we add the liquid. We don't want to add the liquid in too great of quantities at this point. We want to cook it, we want it to absorb, and we want to add another layer. We're cooking this over about medium to medium-high heat at this point. If you have a dial on your stove, I would cook it on 6 to 7, depending upon how reactive your stove is. Not a whole lot to taste at this point. This rice is still going to be 90% raw. We're going to taste this as we get closer to the rice being more cooked. The trick here is to continually stir. You don't need to stir this the entire time. But what you don't want to do is just let it cook itself. You do want the motion of stirring. What that does is it helps release the starch from the rice, and that's going to yield our final product. Another ladle of stock. And this will continue to cook. So this risotto, just a minute or two out from being done. At this point, I'm going to take and remove the oregano that's been cooking into there. A couple key ingredients to finish this. Everything at this point is strictly optional. So once this stock absorbs, the rice is cooked and you can serve it and eat it just as it is. To take it to the next level and kind of richen it up, which is a restaurant trick, we're going to add a few remaining things. We're going to add a couple tablespoons of heavy cream. That's going to add to a lighter color in this case, because we don't want it to be dark. We want to have a nice light color to it. And the heavy cream's really going to kind of emulsify into that stock, meaning that it's going to grab into that chicken stock and thicken this up a little bit in conjunction with the starch that we're releasing from the actual rice. Notice I keep stirring and stirring and stirring. And what that's doing is any last starch that might be left is now pulling out of that rice, right, and helping to yield our final product. We don't want a big glob of risotto in a bowl. We want this to have a soft texture to it, meaning that we don't want to cook this to the point where it absorbs all the liquid and then we add some Parmesan cheese to it and it really thickens up. We want this to have a nice kind of a velvety mouthfeel to it. And we achieve that by not absorbing all of the liquid in, but we still want a little bit of chew to that rice. We don't want that rice to be fully cooked or mushy to take it even a step further. That's why 18 minutes, always remember 18 minutes. Once we get to the 15, 16 minute mark, then we start to introduce these other ingredients for the last couple of minutes. That way we know that that rice is cooked. 18 minutes every time works. So heavy cream's in. Now we're gonna taste it. We wanna check a couple of things. 3 things in particular. The seasoning, the salt quality, and the how firm the rice is or isn't at this point. Wow, is that good. The mushrooms have really offered their flavor well throughout this whole thing. The seasoning's right where we want it. We're gonna taste one more time after we add the Parmesan cheese and stir that in, which we're doing now. This doesn't need to cook at this point. The heat can be off. So now the heat's off. We're simply just stirring in the Parmesan cheese to this. The reason why we don't want to over season at this point is there's some salt quality to the Parmesan cheese. It's a myth when people say that the Parmesan cheese replaces salt. It doesn't. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even come close. But it does add a salt quality that we want to be aware of. But to blatantly substitute it for salt is a misnomer, and I don't recommend it. We're going to add another tablespoon or 2 of butter to this. And again, it'll add a level of richness. All right, so the butter is now incorporated. One final touch, maybe 2. We're going to add a little bit of truffle oil to this. Truffle oil is very strong. You don't need a lot, nor do you want to cook it in. It's a flavor component that you want to just fold in, let it permeate. It'll really reinforce the mushroom. I do know we want to take a little bit of this thyme that we cooked into the beginning, with the onions and the shallots, if you recall. And now we're going to fortify some fresh thyme at this right at the very end. And that balances it. You have the cooked flavor of the thyme from the beginning, and then you have the fresh floral note of the thyme at the very end that's not cooked in. And our risotto is done apart from one final taste and to check for seasoning, and then we can plate. It's right where we want it. The seasoning's right there, and we are going to plate. So you can see that it's not a big, heavy mixture here, okay? It's light, the grains are separate, it's not over mixed, and right to the plate. This can be served as an appetizer portion, it can be used as an entree. You can garnish this with some roasted chicken, for example. A little bit of risotto in the bowl. This is built more for an entree portion here. We want to garnish it with a little bit of more fresh Parmesan cheese right at the very end. A little bit of olive oil here. You could use truffle oil. You want to be careful that it doesn't get too strong at this point. The olive oil is a nice balance to this. And we can garnish with a piece of oregano that we had cooked into this from the beginning. And there you have it. Parmesan mushroom risotto accented with a little bit of truffle oil. I want to thank you again for joining on this episode of Christopher's Cucina. You can follow me on Instagram at Christopher's Cucina.